After the introduction, we probably expect Luke to talk about Jesus right away. But he didn't. Here in chapter 1, verse 5 to 22, Luke begins with the birth of John the Baptist. This account is exclusive to Luke. It's not in the other three Gospels. Mark begins with the baptism of Jesus. Matthew begins with the birth of Jesus. But Luke takes us to an even earlier point of time. He wants to show us that God's plan began even before Jesus was born. It began in the family of John the Baptist. In this lesson, we'll look at verse 5 to 10, which is the setting of this narrative. First, Luke gives us a historical background. It took place in the days of Herod, king of Judea. So where was Judea? In the New Testament times, the place Judea could refer to two different areas. First, properly speaking, Judea refers to the area south of Palestine, the wider area around Jerusalem. But Judea can also refer to the whole Palestine, the whole region including Galilee, Samaria, Judea, and Perea, was also known collectively as Judea. In this sense, this larger Judea sort of carries the meaning the land of the Jews. So here in verse 5, when Herod is called the king of Judea, Luke doesn't mean the smaller proper Judea, but the larger Judea that includes Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. So who was this King Herod? There are actually several Herods in the Bible. Here we are looking at Herod the Great, who is probably the Herod we are most familiar with because of his frequent appearance in the Christmas stories. He was the one who tricked the Magi and tried to kill the baby Jesus. And now, since Judea was part of the Roman Empire, and the ruler of the empire was the Roman emperor or Caesar, then what kind of king was King Herod? In the New Testament times, the Roman Empire had among the largest territories in the human history. But such a large empire was not without its problems. Creating an empire is one thing, but sustaining it is a whole different story. As you can imagine, to maintain peace and political stability in such a large and diverse empire was very challenging. So, to solve this problem, one of the solutions was to appoint a local leader as a client king to rule his own country and his own people, which would reasonably reduce a lot of unnecessary problems and conflicts. And King Herod was one of these client kings appointed by the Roman emperor. These client kings were usually given a lot of power and privileges, but it's important to know that it is the Roman emperor who has the ultimate authority. If these client kings did not do their job well, they could be dismissed or even punished by the emperor. Next, Luke introduces the characters. There was a priest named Zechariah of the divisions of Abijah. We know from 1 Chronicles chapter 24 that since the time of King David, the priests were divided into 24 divisions, 24 orders, and each division would serve in the temple in rotation. And Zechariah belonged to the 8th division, which is the division of Abijah. And he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Aaron was a brother of Moses and the first high priest of Israel. Since Elizabeth was a descendant of Aaron, she was also from the priestly family like Zechariah. More importantly, and they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. What does it mean when the scriptures say that they are righteous? The term righteous is used in a few different ways in the Bible. Here in verse 6 and in many Old Testament narratives, a righteous person is someone who faithfully keeps the law, who faithfully follows after the will of God. It doesn't mean that this righteous person has never sinned. It's just like when we say that someone is a good student or a good colleague. We are not saying that this person has never done anything wrong, but rather we're emphasizing that overall, this person has an upright character. So, a righteous person is someone who consistently follows after God. And even if he has sinned, he is quick to repent and return to God. It is in this sense that people like Noah, Job, Cornelius, Zechariah, and Elizabeth are called righteous. Luke also emphasized that they were not hypocrites before men, but righteous before God. The emphasis is to show that their righteousness, their godliness, was approved by God. They were not like the Pharisees. They were truly godly people. But despite their faithfulness, there was something very painful in their lives. They had no child because Elizabeth was barren and both were advanced in years. Serving God faithfully is no guarantee that our lives will be free from pain and sufferings. It was very real in the lives of Zechariah and Elizabeth, and so it is in each of our lives. Certainly, throughout history, not being able to have children when you want to is a huge disappointment. But in ancient Hebrew culture, it was more than that. It was worse. For women, not being able to give birth was seen as something shameful. Part of the reason for this was religious. While we all agree that having children is a blessing from God, the Israelites went too far and taught that not being able to have children was God's punishment for sinners. This misconception is certainly not biblical. And let's not forget what Luke emphasized in verse 6, that both Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous and that they were blameless in obeying the commandments. Luke is perhaps reminding his readers here that Elizabeth's not being able to conceive was not because of her sin. It was not a punishment from God. Another thing that made the situation worse was that both Zechariah and Elizabeth were advanced in years. They were old. So it was physically impossible for Elizabeth to become pregnant. This whole situation, there was no hope at all. For readers familiar with the Old Testament, Luke might expect you to recall similar events in the past. Abraham and Sarah, Jacob and Rachel, Samson's parents, Samuel's parents, they were childless. But God gave them children. And God didn't just give them children. God also used the children greatly to accomplish great things for Him. What we have before us is a situation without hope and without solution. But it is in the midst of weaknesses and hopelessness that God manifests His power and fulfills His plan. Now, while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by Lord to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of the people were praying outside at the hour of incense. We know that the duty of a priest was to serve in the temple. But here's the problem. There were so many priests, but there was only one temple. Even with 24 divisions working in rotations, there were still too many priests for everyone to have something to do. To solve this problem, the priests drew lots to decide who would serve in the temple. And this time, Zechariah was chosen. More especially, he was chosen for a very important duty, that is to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. According to the Mishnah, which is a very important reference on Judaism, because there were so many priests at that time, a priest was only allowed to burn incense once in his entire life. So this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and definitely a great honor for Zechariah. Every day in the temple, the priests burn the incense and the people pray outside. Right now, this picture in front of us seems to be quite normal. But this day was different. It was not just an ordinary day. Because something extraordinary was about to happen.